All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everybody back to our weekly webinar series, The Lunch Break. Just again, a quick reminder, this series is going to take place every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. And again, we're going to be running through May 30th. If you can't join us for the live webinars throughout the series, we will be recording them for later access, and you'll receive a follow-up email with links to those recordings tomorrow. First, I want to start real quick with our introductions. I want to introduce myself, obviously. I'm your host, Mike Muna, Director of Sales over here at LunchAssist. And I also want to welcome our co-host, Emma Finn. Emma is our Communications and Training Coordinator. And then lastly, we have today's expert. Welcome back, our founder, Jen McNeil, from her trip to France to visit family. I also want to give a special shout out to Catherine Carnitz on the Zoom controls, as well as the rest of the LunchAssist team members that are on the call with us today. We also, again, want to give a special thanks to all of our current customers. Thank you so much for all the support that you've given us, the love. It makes this possible that we can continue to do things like this as well. If you're not a current customer and you're interested in joining, again, I'm going to talk about it at the end of the call today on how you can become a member. So some real quick additional instructions. Please put all your questions in the chat. We will try our best to answer them as we go, but we have also saved 15 to 20 minutes for our Q&A session at the end of the call, and we'll get to everybody's questions then. So please stick around if you can. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Emma to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Mike, and welcome back, Jen. Today, you and I are going to be going into USDA's recent announcement of a new final rule on school meal pattern standards with the goal of strengthening child nutrition. I know that this final rule has been years in the making, and for the first time ever, there will be limits on added sugars and some flexibilities with menu planning. But before we get into all of that, let's start with the basics. Why is the USDA changing meal standards in child nutrition?
Yeah, that is a great question. And hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I just want to confirm everyone can see the slides. Yeah, I can't see them on my screen for some reason. Yeah, you guys are good. Okay. I don't know, I just had to get a new computer, so I think it's all messed up. All right. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because basically the USDA, I've actually been lucky to get to meet with Administrator Long one-on-one about this, and one of our deputy undersecretaries of USDA as well. And I think they've made it really clear that the reason that these rules are changing is due to the mandate by Congress for USDA to align the school meal pattern with the dietary guidelines. So it's not because they want to make our lives more complicated. In fact, they've really tried to listen to advocacy groups to increase some flexibilities in this rulemaking. So I think they've done a really nice job. And of course, there's some things that are going to be more work. That's like, yeah, that's definitely true. But a lot of this has to do with like their mandate, right? So our school meal program aligns with the five meal components that we have. They really align with the dietary guidelines. And the three major categories of change that we have within the new meal standards that we're going to be talking about today are kind of broken down into three categories: nutrition requirements, menu planning flexibilities, and program operations. So we'll walk through these, and you can see there's definitely a lot of changes, but and this is something that USDA has made very clear as well, that this is not HHFKA. Like, this is definitely a lot. Like, Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act is a huge overhaul of our programs. This is more of a light update to the Code of Federal Regulations to modernize some stuff to align it with the dietary guidelines, but it's not the sweeping changes that we saw in 2010 that, changed our whole industry. There are going to be some things that take time to adjust to, and there's we'll talk about what those are today. So I'm excited to get into this with everyone. And please, as we go along, pop your questions in the chat comments, because we're going to do a Q&A at the end, like Mike and Emma mentioned. And so Want to hear from you, questions you have, things you've heard, things like that, and we'll kind of unpack those at the end.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jen. And but there are several child nutrition programs under USDA. So can you tell us what programs does the final rule apply to?
Yes, good point. So there's definitely lots of child nutrition programs. This is a school meal program regulation. So it applies to the school nutrition programs, including NSLP, school breakfast program, SSO, because that seamless summer option is underneath school nutrition program, NSLP snacks, and the special milk program, but most people don't operate that. So there are a tiny couple little things that do apply to SFSP and CACFP. We won't really be talking about those today, but they're just little minor changes, like things that have to do with added sugars versus total sugars that they just kind of align within this rulemaking. But for the most part, this is a school nutrition rule.
Okay, yeah, and it seems like there are quite a few changes to keep track of, but USDA is promising a slow phase in. Could you go over with us when is the final rule effective?
Yes, so this goes into law on July 1st, 2024. So that is true. But there is a phased in approach. So most of the things that are kind of like, I guess, more flexible options, take it or leave it, like you could do this if you want, those are going to start immediately. Um, but most of the more restrictive changes, those are not going to go into effect until at least July 1st, 2025. And some of the things that are going to be more difficult to comply with or going to take time to adjust to, like added sugars across the total week, and sodium requirements and Buy America. And some of those, they're not going to go into effect really until 2027, all the way up until 2031. There's like a phased in approach for some of these. So we'll talk about dates as we go through.
Oh yeah, seeing that timeline is really helpful. Okay, but now let's get into it. We went over the three major categories of changes that the USDA has made to school meal programs as a result of this final rule. The first category being nutrition requirements. Let's go through each of these updates one by one, if that's okay. I know there's a nifty infographic from the USDA outlining those key changes to meal patterns. Can you tell us how these are going to affect school nutrition operators, starting with whole grains?
Yeah, absolutely. So whole grains is an easy one to start with because there's no changes. So thanks for teeing me up easy here, Emma. So whole grains, the current regulation that at least 80% of the weekly grains must be whole grain rich. That's going to continue to be the regulation here. And then just remember that if you have things that are not whole grain, that they need to be enriched or they need to be bran or germ. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at, especially like local products that might be non-whole grain foods. So, but nothing's changed here. That was the rule. That's the rule as of today anyway.
Yeah, no, that's easy and straightforward. Thanks for that. Well, what about milk?
Okay, so milk, the first thing to know is that flavored milk is still on the table. You can still serve flavored milk. That was something that was in the proposed rule. So they listened to stakeholder feedback. Thank you to everyone who made comments. USDA was really listening, and they decided that they would keep the provision to allow for flavored milk, but there would be a limit on the total amount of added sugars in a carton of flavored milk. Now, this doesn't go into effect until 25, 26, but I will say that this is going to be, every school that I've seen already meets this. So I'm working with schools mostly in California when I'm looking at menus. So there's probably some regional differences there. But over 90% of the dairy producers in the United States have signed on to a commitment that they will meet this with their products. And it's very, I don't want to diminish the work that they have to do to meet it, but it seems like a pretty easy change that a lot of folks have already been meeting for many years. So kudos to the dairy producers for getting on board with this. Limiting the added sugars in a carton of flavored milk is something that's going to go into effect next school year, but I don't think this will be a major sweeping change that I don't even think the kids probably notice much here.
Well, speaking of added sugars, that's kind of what's caused the biggest headlines, I think, with this new final rule. This is the first time that there's going to be limits on added sugars. So what do schools need to know about these changes?
So I think the first thing to know is the first requirements that go into effect in 25, 26 are going to be product-based limits on specific products. So the first product we talked about was flavored milk. The other two, breakfast cereals and yogurt, those limits on added sugars, again, similar to milk, I think this is going to be pretty easy to find in the marketplace because the WIC program and the CACFP program already have limits on the total amount of sugars in breakfast cereals. So there's been like many, many years of like products being developed that meet, especially breakfast cereals. That's definitely like, a product in the marketplace that needs to be developed a specific way. So there's lots of availability there. And yogurt under the CACFP regulations already has limits on added sugars. So I think this one, again, similar to the milk, is going to be pretty seamless to kind of integrate into our programs. The next one, phase 2, goes into effect not till 27, 28. So we definitely have many years to kind of study up. Manufacturers and food distributors and everyone, they have time to kind of look at what they're offering. And our software companies that do nutrient analysis have time to update their software because the phase 2 is more of a sweeping change. And for the first time ever, we have a weekly limit on the added sugars across the week that are limited to less than 10% of calories across the week come from added sugars. So, I mean, this is definitely a big change. And it means that, things that are offered in our meals, we're going to have to make those decisions at the local level to ensure that we meet this and have the software available to us to be able to look at how that's monitored, right? Like how that adds up across the week. So yeah, this is going to be a change. But I will note that one thing that was not finalized is the added sugar limitation on grain-based desserts. So in the proposed rules, you might recall that they were talking about putting a limit on, like, a muffin can't have more than, or a coffee cake can't have more than a certain amount of sugar. So grain-based desserts don't have a cap on the amount of sugar, but they would be captured within this 10%. So I think that will still naturally lower the amount of sugar in grain-based desserts because manufacturers will be sensitive to getting their foods on the menu. And I think it's also going to be a positive for those of us who are scratch cooking or even manufacturers looking at using things like banana or applesauce, because that's not an added sugar, that's a naturally occurring sugar. So added sugars really pertains to things like corn syrup or cane sugar or just like brown sugar, those things added to your foods. It's not looking at things like applesauce or banana if you're using that to make a muffin or a cookie or something like that. So I think hopefully we'll see like an increase in the scratch cooking and also things that are sourced from naturally occurring like fruits and vegetables as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a big change, not just for food manufacturers that are going to need to change, but the USDA foods program as well, right? And, in addition to these added sugar limitations, the new final rule has added some limits to sodium as well. So what exactly has changed with the sodium requirements?
Yes. So if you recall, sodium has been something that we've had sodium restrictions on the table, and they've been changing, they've been postponed, all of that, really since like we first saw them come out in 2010 with the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. Right now, as of today, we're on target 1A of the sodium requirements that were proposed originally in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act and finalized way back then. So as you can see here on the screen, current sodium limit in place. We're going to continue on target 1A, which started this year, 23-24. We started on target 1A. We're going to continue on that until June 30th of 2027. And then we're going to see a 10% reduction in sodium on the school breakfast program and a 15% reduction on the school lunch program in sodium limits that must be implemented by 2027. So they've decided to kind of basically do what they feel is reasonable change in sodium. And I will note that there is a provision for them to do research on the impact of the lowering sodium, the impact that that has on participation. So I think this phased in approach of going, not having any change on sodium until 2027 is going to help give time to be able to sort of look and see what the impact of this is. And yeah, hopefully this is a reasonable change. And I'm eager to kind of see what folks come up with and like work with you all to see what sort of changes we do make on our menus and our recipes to be able to implement these lower sodium requirements in a couple of years.
Yeah. And, as talking about participation in school meals, breakfast participation is historically lower than lunch participation. So let's start with the first meal of the day as we dive into the new menu planning flexibilities that are part of this final rule. What are some big changes to breakfast that people need to be aware of?
Breakfast is one of those meal patterns, as anyone who's ever taught offer versus serve, breakfast is one of those meal patterns that is like just a little bit funky. And there is something that was changed that I think is going to make our lives a lot easier as menu planners. And what they've done is they've actually combined the grains and the meat alternate meal component. So there's essentially no like this morning when you served breakfast, you had to have a 1 ounce grain on our menus, right? Like that was what, like, as of today, that's what we have to do with everything that we serve. Now, moving forward, and this goes into effect July 1st, 2024, so you can start using this back to school menus, you do not have to have a 1 ounce grain on your menu. So that's really cool. If you want to do, let's say, like, eggs on your menu, like eggs and sauteed spinach or something like that, you don't have to have a piece of toast with it. If you want to do yogurt and fruit, you don't have to have granola with it. So the 1 ounce equivalent is required, but it can be from either grains or meat alternate. So this really opens up a lot of flexibility, and I think it is going to be really powerful for increasing the amount of protein that kids get in the morning, with satiety, lowering overall sugar consumption. I think this is a really positive change.
Yeah, and I mean, eliminating the added granola from the yogurt bowls or other grains at breakfast would probably lower overall sodium and added sugars in school meals, which would help schools plan for these new nutrition requirements coming down the line.
Yeah, 100%. And then the next one for breakfast that is kind of like already a thing, but it's changed a bunch. So it's sort of like, okay, let's get our bearings on what it is now with the new rule. So veggies at breakfast. So vegetables have been able to substitute for fruit in the school breakfast program. But originally in the Healthy Younger Free Kids Act, it was kind of like you had to serve all these other vegetable subgroups before you could serve starchy vegetables, because essentially it was all about hash browns at breakfast and like not overdoing it, I guess, with hash browns at breakfast. So apparently hash browns at breakfast are very controversial. So what the new rule is, it kind of just like puts a nice little bow around this, and I think it's very reasonable, is schools that offer vegetables at breakfast 1 day per school, one day per week can offer a vegetable from any vegetable subgroup. So if you just want to offer hash browns 1 day a week, that's fine. Doesn't matter. You don't have to offer any other vegetables. But let's say at your high school, you want to have hash browns every day. Kids freaking love them. So you have hash browns every day. Then you have to have a second vegetable out there on your service line. But that's it. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch of different vegetable subgroups, just a second one. So let's say you can throw like a bag of baby carrots out there. I actually used to do that in my high schools, and the kids freaking love the bag of baby carrots at breakfast as well. Don't tell me why. Don't ask me why. So the other thing is there's just a little note like to add, just one more thing to remember. For school year 24-25, they said you can just do any vegetable at breakfast. It doesn't matter. So while it says this goes into effect 24-25, there's like some layer of authority from Congress that allows any vegetable at breakfast during 24-25. And then the second vegetable needs to start being served in 25-26. So yeah, that's all there, and it's written in the USDA summaries as well.
Perfect. I mean, speaking of proteins and vegetables, plant-based meals are becoming more in demand by students and by entire school communities, whether it be from a health perspective, religious or environmental concern, dietary choice, or personal need. How does the final rule accommodate plant-based proteins?
There is definitely some really cool changes with plant-based proteins. And Emma, I'm going to pass the mic back to you because you've done a lot of work in your career on this topic. So can you walk us through it?
With honor. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is actually not the biggest thing, but one thing is that the final rule has a small terminology change from legumes, beans and peas, to the beans, peas, and lentils vegetable subgroup. Also new is that beans, peas, and lentils offered as a meat alternate may now count toward the weekly beans, peas, and lentils vegetable subgroup requirement, as long as a separate vegetable is offered to meet the daily and weekly vegetable component, which is a little bit confusing. So actually, Jen, could you give us an example of that?
Yes, happily. So this is something that USDA recognized in the Code of Federal Regulations that has potential to be a little bit confusing and could be misinterpreted. So I'll walk us through an example, and I also want to caveat this with like it's probably going to be most relevant for schools that only have one entree per day. If you have multiple entrees, you might not really take advantage of this, but basically what it means is that like let's look at this example, wrap with chickpeas, tomatoes, and lettuce. This was actually in the USDA examples, and they said, okay, if you have a wrap with chickpeas, tomatoes, and lettuce, you're probably going to want to count the chickpeas as a meat alternate, right? Most of us want to have like an MMA and a grain in our entree. But that wrap with chickpeas, so let's say we count the chickpeas as an MMA, meat alternate, and now this is the new thing. They can, even though they're counted as an MMA, they can kind of check the box as you offering beans, peas, and lentils during the week. However, you still have to, they don't count as a vegetable, right? They're counting as an MMA, so you still have to have a vegetable. So the tomatoes and lettuce served in that wrap can count as your vegetable of the day.
Right. And
yeah,
one other big win for plant forward school meals is that this final rule allows nuts and seeds to credit for the full meat alternates component in all meals, breakfast, lunch, and supper offered through the CMP. This is up from just 50%. Also, nuts and seeds can continue to meet the entire meat alternate requirement at snack.
Yeah, this is the good one. This is like let's say you have a vegan salad with sunflower seeds as the meat alternate. Again, if you were serving that today for lunch, that wouldn't have been able to count for your full meat alternate. You would have had to have, beans or something else on that vegan salad. So now nuts and seeds can count as a full component. And I think this was something that was like kind of just an outdated regulation that they realized, okay, this needs to be updated. So there's really not a good reason for it. So kudos to USDA for recognizing that and updating it. And thank you to advocacy groups like Friends of the Earth and who used to work for Emma and the other teams around the country that have really voiced concerns over this because this is like a direct result of that advocacy.
Absolutely. And nuts and seeds are also really popular in the after school snack program. Is there anything new here that we need to know?
Oh yeah, big changes on the after school snacks. So this goes into effect 25-26. So you don't have to do this for the upcoming school year, but the following school year, 25-26, the after school snack program will have an update to the meal pattern. If you recall, this actually didn't ever change with the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. So it's like a super old meal pattern. And fruits and vegetables are still a combined component. So what they've done is they just modeled the NSLP after school snack meal pattern to match the CACFP after school snacks, like under at risk. So essentially it pretty much aligns with CACFP if you're familiar with that one. The biggest changes are going to be, well, now there's 5 components, just like lunch. And so you could do fruit and vegetable, like you could serve carrots and apples as your snack now, where like in the old meal pattern you can. So that with this updated one, fruits and veggies are 2 separate components. So the kids pick, you have to select 2 components for your snack. You could do fruits and vegetables together as a snack. The other thing I think is going to be the biggest like menu change, which is why it's good we have 14 months or so to plan, is that grain-based desserts are not permitted. So similar to CACFP, no grain-based desserts. So a lot of folks have grain-based desserts on the snack menu. It's easy in the afternoon, but that's going to be something that we'll look forward to any definitions around that. If it's, I do have a question of like if there's any exemptions or anything, because CACFP doesn't have grain-based desserts, but animal crackers are allowed. So I don't know if they're going to allow that same, like align those definitions of grain-based desserts, but that will definitely be a change on many, many school menus for the after-school snack program, no grain-based desserts. And then something that's different than the CACFP snack meal pattern is CACFP snack has like a daily limitation on juice. They just align that with NSLP, so it's a weekly juice limitation. So no more than half of the weekly fruit or vegetable offerings can come from juice. And whole grains as well. It's across the week. 80% of the grains in this after-school snack program need to be whole grain rich. So that's kind of the quick version. There's a really nice chart within the USDA resources that goes through the changes as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can pop that into the chat. But there's also been some big changes that affect Indigenous communities to support traditional dietary patterns and needs. The final rule specifically states in regulation that traditional Indigenous foods may be served in reimbursable meals, which is huge. So how else has USDA helped to accommodate and support Indigenous diets in the final rule?
So this is a really important menu planning flexibility that is codified now in the Code of Federal Regulations. So this is very important. The other thing is the vegetables for grains substitution. So vegetables can now be served in lieu of grains in certain communities. So in tribally operated schools or those schools that are that serve a primarily American Indian or Alaskan Native population, also schools in Guam and Hawaii. And then I didn't know this, this provision already applied to schools in American Samoa, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. So I just think that's important to point out because it's in response to traditional diets and also availability of grains, you know, where starchy vegetables are going to be more commonly served kind of like as grains in these schools. So I think that's really great. I'm happy to see this. And I know at the beginning we mentioned that these regulations are really in this final rule are about school nutrition programs, but there are a couple little things that extend to SFSP and CACFP. This is one of them. So this extends to SFSP and CACFP as well.
Wow. Okay. Well, the third chapter of the final rule here is program operations. Let's start with hiring. How do the hiring changes affect LEAs?
So we are so excited about this. We know many child nutrition directors and supervisors and frontline staff who are going to be positively impacted by this change. So previously, the regulations really had a glass ceiling on the advancement of child nutrition professionals that don't have a bachelor's degree. And so this flexibility on program operations allows state agencies to permit a child nutrition professional with 10 years of school nutrition experience to advance in their career into a school nutrition director position. So there's still a layer of approval from the state agency, but it allows that hiring flexibility so that those of you who are looking to advance your career but don't want to have a ton of student loan debt are able to and honors that experience. Whereas, you know, the education is not the only way to learn how to be a school nutrition director, not by any stretch of the imagination. So this is really cool. We're really excited about that.
It is really cool. Now let's talk about meal modifications, as I know that changes some things. Current policy allows for state licensed healthcare professionals to write medical statements to request meal modifications on behalf of child or adult participants with disabilities in the NSLP, SBP, and CACFP. But how does the final rule change current policy around meal modifications?
So the major change here is, I mean, there's just a few little things in there. If you kind of want to get into the minute details, there's some like regulatory text that was changed. But the biggest thing is that registered dietitians can now write medical statements. So yay, dietitians can write special diets. Any of us who are dietitians know how ridiculous it is that wasn't the case before, not by USDA, but just, you know, that's the way it is for RDs. We're always, you know, on the lower side of the totem pole in the medical community, but at least USDA has given us the authority to write medical statements. Woo!
Yeah, getting the recognition y'all deserve. The next operational change as part of this final rule has been to geographic preference. Now, since 2011, child nutrition regulations have allowed geographic preference, but did not allow the preference for local to be used as a bid specification. However, the new final rule allows locally grown, locally raised, or locally caught as procurement.
Oh, Emma's cutting out for me. Is she cutting out for y'all? Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, this is huge. I almost wanted to just start off with this one because I was so excited about the like local procurement changes. So yeah, locally grown, raised, or caught can now be used as specifications for minimally processed foods. So basically what that means is that we can write our bids or any of our procurement solicitations and say, I want local oranges. And then that's up to you to define what local is as well. So that is freaking so cool and long overdue. But like just so excited that that is what we can do now. There's so much emphasis on farm to school and so important. But we've kind of had these funky regulations where we couldn't, we had to dance around the word local in our specifications by specifying hours from harvest or applying geographic preference after the fact. So now we can just straight up say, I want those local oranges from within 50 miles of my school district. And that's the only folks that will be able to respond. As long as your bid is not, overly restrictive, you can use that. And it's just going to be huge for farm to school and being able to prioritize our local farmers and make it really clear and concise and straight to the point of what we want.
Yes, could not agree more. And speaking of buying local, what changes have been made to buy American?
So this is the last thing we're going to cover, and this is a big one. So keep paying attention to this final kind of change because it's a bit funky. So part of it does go into effect in 24-25, but then you can see there's like a phased in approach all the way out to school year 31, which I don't even want to think about. That just doesn't compute. But okay, so I actually want to go to this exceptions list first. So so as many of us know, a lot of folks like have it with the Buy American provision. We have to have we have to write an exception if we buy something non-domestic. Most schools serve bananas, right? And bananas are usually non-domestic. So one of the things that folks asked for in the public comment was, can we just get like a list of things that are approved exceptions? And so, yes, we have it. And I'm going to put it in the chat. And it's really interesting. There's this list from the federal government that lots of different federal agencies use. I just popped the link in. It's an exceptions list. It's kind of like a list of things that are not available. It's not just foods. It's also things like diamonds are on the list. So, but bananas, mandarin oranges, and pineapple and olives. Those are some of the things that we often see schools having to write exception form saying this is not available, but I want to have canned mandarin oranges on my salad bar. I want to have bananas on my breakfast menu. So with the new regulations, you will not have to write documentation for bananas or those other products that appear on this list if they're on that list, right? So it's just a few items, but it does alleviate that burden of every school in the US writing an exception form for bananas. So yay! That's really good. It also requires Buy American language in procurement procedures, bids, solicitations, and contracts. And it continues to, you still have to write other exception forms for things that don't appear on the list. So if you have cherry tomatoes that you serve in January and they're not available in the US because they're out of season, you're bringing them in from South America or Mexico, then you would have to write an exception form, and those don't appear on that list. So now the biggest thing that is going to be like completely new, we've never done before, is limiting non-domestic food purchases to a percentage of our total food budget. So This is new. It doesn't start until 25, 26. So I know that USDA is going to do some more technical assistance and training on exactly how to calculate this, but it's basically going to be a calculation that we'll have to do to kind of prove, and it'll be monitored through our administrative reviews, that we aren't spending more. Ultimately, it's going to be 5%, but it's phased in 10%, 8%, 5%. So we'll have to prove like, of the bananas, even though they're an approved exception, the cap still applies. So like, how much should we spend on bananas? How much should we spend on canned mandarin oranges? How much should we spend on those cherry tomatoes in January, February, and March when they were out of season? If we're buying those products, we're going to have to monitor the amount of money spent and make sure it doesn't exceed a certain percentage. So here, I think the biggest thing is it's not really like I wouldn't worry for most people, I wouldn't worry about the percentage per se. Like, I don't think most people are spending 5% of their food budget on bananas. But I think it's more the tracking piece. And hopefully, there's some sort of mechanism that makes this easier. Like, maybe there's some velocity reports that are tagged by country of origin that producers come out with. And like, all of your purchases with local farmers, you don't even need to look at. But if you buy from a broadline produce distributor, for example, perhaps the broadline produce distributor needs to help you out because I'm sure there's some stuff coming from outside of the US certain times of year. So that's where this is like, it's really that emphasis that's coming down from the entire federal government on both sides of the aisle to like keep these federal dollars in the United States. And so it's another layer of regulation to, support that. So
yeah.
That's our Buy American changes. Back to you, Emma.
Yeah, as Yosef said in the chat, hopefully distributors get better at source ID.
Absolutely.
So that's actually all the questions I had for you today. Before we open it up to Q&A, I will pass it back to Mike to close us out. And don't forget to pop your questions into the chat, everyone. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Jen. This was a great presentation. I think we had a number of people join today, which I guess it means it was really popular. So a couple of things I do want to touch on first. This with the new rules coming out, one of the things I'm sure people will be asking about are our videos. So we're already on top of it. We will be updating all of our current videos to for anything that coincides with the new rule. As well, we do have some videos that we have been holding out to release because we were waiting on the new rule to come out and officially, be put out there before we actually finalize those videos. So now that it's out there, we'll get those videos touched up and then those videos will be released as well. And then just keep in mind, again, if you do need extra support, you can always explore, a consulting contract with us as well, and we're happy to help you guys. Now, before we get into our Q&A, I want to talk about how to access the follow-up resources from the call today. So, or I'm sorry, I just misspoke what I was saying. Before we get into Q&A, I want to talk about how you guys who aren't current members, a little bit about our services. So our LunchAssist Pro membership offers on-demand training videos, curated resources, professional standards tracking tool. We also have the add-on features like our Spanish videos, the AR Bootcamp, which is extremely popular right now. And then as well, our one-on-one consulting services to all of our California districts with one of our expert level consultants, most of whom used to be former auditors. So we've talked about this before, but ways to purchase. LunchAssist services are allowable under your KIT funds. In fact, recently we've had a lot of districts reach out to us about doing multi-year contracts just based off of the way that the KIT funds are structured, use it or lose it type scenario. So we are doing some multi-year contracts with our LunchAssist Pro memberships. Just keep in mind if you want to utilize your 2021 KIT funds that those are expiring soon in June. So we advise you to get on that sooner rather than later. If you want to talk to me more about how you can purchase a membership or any of our consulting services, you can reach out to me directly at mike@lunchassist.org. Now, as far as the recordings go, again, we will be sending out a follow-up email on tomorrow with links to those videos. The videos actually exist on our YouTube channel, so if you want to search our YouTube channel as well, you can find them there too. Next chat is going to be again next Thursday at 2 p.m. We will be focusing on the meal application and alternative income forms. Hopefully you guys can join us for that as well. Now, thanks again for everybody for joining. We're going to go into our Q&A now, and I'm going to pass it back to Emma to take it over.
Thank you, Mike.